Here's the issue that I see with talking about whether it's good or bad or what's going on. The people who push back against this have everything to lose. Their family, their friends, their kids, their jobs. The people supporting the grooming have everything to gain. They have no families. They probably don't have jobs. They got nothing to lose by protesting, but everything to gain with their devious predilections. That's the challenge here. What dad is going to be like, I'm taking off work to go and protest groomers?
So there's a lot more to that you're not allowed to talk about. There's a couple topics in this free speech land of ours we're not allowed to talk about. So I'm not going to talk about those things. I'm going to talk about this concept of demoralization. Demoralization means that you are so tired of it that even if you're told the CIA killed JFK, who cares, dude? It's, you're so tired, you're demoralized. You're not willing to fight back anymore. You're letting the other side win. This is a goal of warfare. It's a goal of warfare. So I brought you a little warfare book here. So ironic.
Sun Tzu's whole idea was, the best way to defeat your enemy is by defeating him psychologically.
Yeah, get him to defeat himself.
You want to break his will to fight.
So I have this book here for you. It's called Battle for the Mind. It's about brainwashing. It was written in 1957, and William Sargent, who wrote it, he worked specifically on PTSD. Let me just take you into this book. Here's a chapter contents if you need to know nerdy stuff like that. But here's a little preface, right? William Sargent, he's doing research into brainwashing. He wrote a book called Battle for the Mind. We're reading it right now. World War II showed that with enough exposure, enough battle exposure, every soldier eventually shows the symptoms of battle fatigue, shell shock, or what we now call post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD. Sargent's basis was a Pavlovian theory. Oh, that's fascinating. Let's turn a couple pages and learn a little bit more. Now, this had various phases. There's the paradoxical inhibition. There's the ultra paradoxical inhibition. And then there's the transmarginal collapse. This is where the whole thing breaks down. Now I'm going to read you the paragraph, then I'm going to show you a picture. There's a graphic in here, and it all makes sense. A state of breakdown occurs in which the person or dog, because remember, he's using Pavlov, so they don't need people in the experiment. They got dogs. They work the same way in Pavlov theory, cannot function and has lost key markers by which they or it understood the world. So they're talking about under stress, you lose this map of the world. Basic learning, basic assumptions about the world have been challenged. If the person or dog could change some of these assumptions, they could build a new map of the world, a different world, and function again if the trauma had not been too great. So he's like, if the breakdown occurs, like you're going to have to go through some rebuilding. You just bumped into some things. You might have to do some learning. You're going to need to form a new map of the world. Now,
like what
the goal,
happens to Evie and V for Vendetta. That's
right.
What, so V puts her through.
So here's the map for combat exhaustion. And this is kind of like this slippery slope right here, right? The demoralization is setting in. You no longer fight back. So you have soldier becomes battle wise and then has a maximum period of efficiency. And then they're in the hyper reactive stage where it's diminishing returns, right? There's a period of overconfidence, and that's dangerous. And then there's emotional exhaustion stage. And right here is what they're trying to work on and figure out how it works. So if you come over to this page, page 29, on the contrary, the continued exercise of willpower and courage may, in certain circumstances, exhaust the brain and hasten a final collapse. So in those situations, even though soldiers want to go forward, they can't. They need a period of convalescence, a recovery period. So all these ideas that they learned from studying these soldiers and PTSD in World War I, then after World War I, they had Tavistock Institute. And from that, you had things like the World War II studies and the Battle for the Mind. And then this was all wrapped into MK Ultra and moving forward. But it's also the Soviet plan for taking over America, the demoralization of a nation. Now, G. Edward Griffin once upon a time interviewed a cat back in the 80s who used to work for the KGB. The KGB was, by the way, the place that first said trust but verify. And then Reagan was hanging out with a KGB agent, apparently. And he's like, oh, that's my phrase now, right? That's a good phrase. It's a smart phrase to use.
Yeah, it's
right?
smart phrase. Indeed.
So Yuri Bezmenov is a defector from Russia during the Soviet Cold War times. And Ed Griffin gets him on camera. And we're going to play that clip, and then we're going to go into the intermission directly. We'll just play this clip and then channel change into the intermission. We're going to look at Iran-Contra. This is a clip from Dan Tavius. Historic look, a little comedy in there, make you laugh, but you're also going to see a lot of overlaps from the intelligence agencies and the blackmail networks and everything we kind of talked about tonight. So it's going to bring everything into a nice, nice
two
like
takeaways.
Salad formation. You got all these ingredients. We're going to sweep them together. And yeah, go ahead.
Two takeaways from Yuri Bezmenov, mentioned many times on the show. Ideological subversion is the methodology. I think the second or third stage of that has to do with demoralization, which then allows for the fertile ground or the cultivation of the type of society they want to build. The other thing he mentioned that I want people to pay attention to is how much his job within the KGB and how much of what the KGB was doing had very little to do with the sort of James Bond portrayal through Ian Fleming of secret agents. And
yeah, a lot of KGB was just keeping their own people in line.
It was journalism. There was narrative creation and that sort of thing. So pay attention to those two elements. They're very, very, very important, especially in light of what we just showed in the past couple of clips.
And for those of you playing at home on your own history blueprint, KGB is in here. You can see what it actually stands for. You can see where it plays along, who is involved, and maybe these guys, some of these guys, British agents. So we'll check that out afterwards.
Fletcher Browning.
Yup. All right, let's go to Yuri Bezmenov a couple centuries ago. Get in the time machine. Let's go back into the 1980s. Talk to a KGB defector who we can listen to, but we can't ask him questions.
Mr. Bezmenov was born in 1939 in a suburb of Moscow. He was the son of a high-ranking Soviet Army officer. He was educated in the elite schools inside the Soviet Union and became an expert in Indian culture and Indian languages. He had an outstanding career with Novosti, which was and still is, I should say, the press arm or the press agency of the Soviet Union. It turns out that this is also a front for the KGB. He escaped to the West in 1970 after becoming totally disgusted with the Soviet system, and he did this at great risk to his life. He certainly is one of the world's outstanding experts on the subject of Soviet propaganda and disinformation and active measures. Well, you spoke several times before about ideological subversion. That is a phrase that I'm afraid some Americans don't fully understand. When the Soviets use the phrase ideological subversion, what do they mean by it?
Ideological subversion is the slow process which we call either ideological subversion or active measures, активные мероприятия in the language of the KGB, or psychological warfare. What it basically means is to change the perception of reality of every American to such an extent that despite of the abundance of information, no one is able to come to sensible conclusions in the interests of defending themselves, their families, their community, and their country. It's a great brainwashing process which goes very slow, and it's divided in four basic stages. The first one being demoralization. It takes from 15 to 20 years to demoralize a nation. Why that many years? Because this is the minimum number of years which requires to educate one generation of students in the country of your enemy, exposed to the ideology of the enemy. In other words, Marxism-Leninism ideology is being pumped into the soft heads of at least 3 generations of American students without being challenged or counterbalanced by the basic values of Americanism, American patriotism. The demoralization process in the United States is basically completed already. For the last 25 years, actually it's overfulfilled, because demoralization now reaches such areas where previously not even Comrade Andropov and all his experts would even dream of such a tremendous success. Most of it is done by Americans to Americans, thanks to lack of moral standards. As I mentioned before, exposure to true information does not matter anymore. A person who was demoralized is unable to assess true information. The facts tell nothing to him. Even if I shower him with information, with authentic proof, with documents, with pictures, even if I take him by force to the Soviet Union and show him concentration camp, he will refuse to believe it until he is going to receive a kick in his fat bottom. When a military boot crashes his balls, then he will understand, but not before that. That's the tragic of the situation of demoralization. The next stage is destabilization. This time, subverter does not care about your ideas and the patterns of your consumption. Whether you eat junk food and get fat and flabby, doesn't matter anymore. This time, and it takes only from 2 to 5 years to destabilize a nation, what matters is essentials: economy, foreign relations, defense systems. And you can see it quite clearly that in some areas, in such sensitive areas as defense and economy, the influence of Marxist-Leninist ideas in the United States is absolutely fantastic. I could never believe it 14 years ago when I landed in this part of the world that the process will go that fast. The next stage, of course, is crisis. It may take only up to 6 weeks to bring a country to the verge of crisis. You can see it in Central America now. And after crisis, with a violent change of power, structure, and economy, you have so-called the period of normalization. It may last indefinitely. Normalization is a cynical expression borrowed from Soviet propaganda. When the Soviet tanks moved into Czechoslovakia in '68, Comrade Brezhnev said, "Now the situation in brotherly Czechoslovakia is normalized." This is what will happen in the United States if you allow all these schmucks to bring the country to crisis, to promise people all kind of goodies and the paradise on earth, to destabilize your economy, to eliminate the principle of free market competition, and to put a big brother government in Washington, D.C., with benevolent dictators like Walter Mondale, who will promise lots of things, never mind whether the promises are fulfillable or not. Your leftists in the United States, all these professors and all these beautiful civil rights defenders, they are instrumental in the process of the subversion only to destabilize the nation. When their job is completed, they are not needed anymore. They know too much. Some of them, when they get disillusioned, when they see that Marxist-Leninists come to power, obviously they get offended. They think that they will come to power. That will never happen, of course. They will be lined up against the wall and shot. But they may turn into the most bitter enemies of Marxist-Leninists when they come to power. And that's what happened in Nicaragua. You remember most of these former Marxist-Leninists were either put to prison or one of them split, and now he's working against Sandinistas. It happened in Grenada when Maurice Bishop was already a Marxist. He was executed by a new Marxist who was more Marxist than this Marxist. Same happened in Afghanistan when first there was Taraki, he was killed by Amin, then Amin was killed by Babrak Karmal with the help of KGB. Same happened in Bangladesh when Mujibur Rahman, very pro-Soviet leftist, was assassinated by his own Marxist-Leninist military comrades. It's the same pattern everywhere. The time bomb is ticking with every second.
What makes the Grand Theft World podcast unique, invigorating, exciting, and informative? Most other podcasts out there are either doing straight up interviews or they're just covering the daily news. They're covering current events from the day they happened. And that is effective. It's useful. It's a great starting point. And then sometimes these current events change during the week past the first story. So we like to give it a little time. You have to wait till some of the dust settles on these stories in order to give them accurate coverage. And the other thing that's really missing in the media landscape is covering the articles that are coming out every day. That's great. That's necessary. But who's bringing in contextual history so that you can understand what has been going on for decades and decades to lead up to the machinations and actions that we see unfolding today? So what we do here on the podcast is we cover current events. Many of these things are censored, but we wait about a week. As a forensic historian, I focused mainly through my career on the history of globalism and collectivism and things that they call maybe the New World Order. there's a lot of facts to these sort of circumstances, groups, events, activities, working groups that they've had over time. So for Grand Theft World listeners, we not only break down the current events, most of which that are censored during the week, we provide you with contextual history, we give you the source notes, the references, we do deep dives, and this really empowers you with an understanding of context and history so that you can make more informed decisions in your life. There's also a community, a membership where you guys can actually ask questions and we can get into the show and share evidence. And there's a town hall weekly for Grand Theft World for those who listen to it and are interested in covering the stories that we don't get to during a 6-hour show. Listening to it an hour a day, you could easily consume the week's news, but you're going to have substance and meaning and context and understanding. And with that, you can make higher quality decisions in your life. So if you're interested in more quality in your life, go to grandtheftworld.com, click podcast at the top, and we'll see you there. Thank you.
These allegations are false.
This isn't Grand Theft Auto, folks. This isn't a video game.
What are the most surprising things that you discovered once you started pulling on that thread? Who he was connected to, what institutions he was influential over, what events he participated in?
Come on, man. What are we talking about? Come on, man. No.
You don't have to think about it, dude.
I got this quote because you said you didn't know much about Klaus Schwab. I made it my job to, as soon as this happened, I'm like, okay, this guy's their front man. Let me learn about the official history of the World Economic Forum. I got their 40-year history. I got every book that Klaus Schwab has written or ghostwritten. I went through those books. This is one of the most interesting passages.
Come on, man. Come